This is the story of a girl described in many ways. Waist-length jet black hair, captivating blue eyes sparkling like stars. Eva Lilith was the most beautiful woman in the Varma Empire and the wife of Duke Kalai. Despite being beautiful and graceful, hidden behind her appearance was the image of a shrewish wife, feared by the entire ducal family. Kalai. Eva Lilith was always a domineering, rude, and irritable woman. But the mystery about her was that more than anything else in this world, she hated her husband and wanted nothing to do with him. The action of this strange story begins with a man sitting in a chair. It was Duke Fervent Kalai, Eva Lilith's husband. In the hall where the Duke was sitting, the advisors surrounding him began to ask about the marriage, as they had not heard any news for the entire 4 years since the wedding day. The gentleman reminded everyone that their marriage contract with the Duchy of Varma had not yet expired. One of the advisors said that if he was on bad terms with the Duchess, Fervent should say so now, as this was the time to ask the Emperor for an early divorce. Clutching his head at the strange questions, Fervent said that they had better ask Eva directly about their relationship, as she was avoiding him. One of the advisors did not hesitate, starting to talk about how no one could handle Eva's explosive personality, so they would immediately file for divorce and remarry. For him, the gentleman was furious with what was said, asserting that violating the contract was an extremely uncivilized act in diplomacy, and there was only 1 year left to endure until the contract ended. As it turned out, the Kalai family for generations had only a few heirs by the age of 25, and the Duke was already 25. The Duke's father was 40 when he was born, and Fervent said that he had enough strength to have a child, but now was not the time. Fervent did not allow anyone to hear similar things, and immediately dismissed all the advisors from the hall. This meeting was not successful. The Duchess called the advisors to see her. They were confused by the summons and thought that the Duchess would again ask them to collect more assets for the Duchy of Varma, after which the peasants would suffer greatly. One of Varma's allies asked why Eva had summoned all of them. Looking at the advisors with mysterious eyes, Eva replied that from now on, they would stop sending wealth to the Duchy of Varma. She also asked to convey to the peasants that she would no longer seize their property, and then apologize for having behaved so foolishly due to her extraordinary attachment to her family. Everything that had happened was the story of a novel called Fervent and Stella, which Ket, an ordinary cashier at a store, was reading. But a customer approached her and asked to pay. Not long before, she was an aspiring singer working part-time. There were many times she woke up in the hospital because of a strenuous work schedule from early in the morning. Studying and working had worn her out. That day, Ket fainted again right behind the counter, but this day was a little different. She hit her head on the tile floor and died. When she opened her eyes, she saw a young man on the bed, sleeves rolled up, shirt unbuttoned, revealing a slender figure underneath. The man had beautiful blonde hair. The strange man was sleeping on the edge of the bed, next to Ket, which confused her greatly. She didn't understand where she was, why she was in bed, or who this man was, since she had been at work. In fear, the girl closed her eyes, hoping that when she opened them again, everything would suddenly be back in its proper place. Suddenly, the Duke touched Ket's head, hovering over her with his masculine frame. He begged her to wake up. The man was very worried about his wife. Meanwhile, Ket was thinking about what to do in this situation. She decided that when the strange man left, she would try to understand what was happening. While she was thinking, the Duke suddenly kissed the girl. Then Ket suddenly opened her eyes, which stunned the Duke, and it seemed his eyes were a little scared. The Duke immediately called her name, Eva. Hearing this name, Ket became even more frightened, from which she lost consciousness again, as if in another body. The next morning, the lady's room was surrounded by maids and a doctor. After an examination, he said that there was nothing wrong with the lady's health. The servants were overjoyed with this news. Ket was immediately awakened by the noisy and bustling servants. She still didn't understand where she was and why everyone was calling her that. Before fainting, Ket had seen a man call her Eva. At that moment, all the servants were calling her the Duchess. Kalai. She realized that she had died and been reborn in the body of Eva Lilith. In the novel, Eva until the very end insisted that the accusations were unfair, as she was also the illegitimate child of the defeated Duchy of Varma. As his only daughter, who carried his blood, her life was dedicated to the Varma Empire. The imperial family, friendly with the Grand Duke, accepted her as a gift, after which she married Duke Kalai, who was the emperor's right-hand man and an influential man in the empire. During the 4 years of marriage, there was no news of an heir, and rumors that this woman was not even capable of performing the minimum duties of a duchess spread throughout the Kalai Duchy. However, when there was little time left before the contract expired, someone put poison in Duke Kalai's wine. Suspicion immediately fell on his wife, Eve Lilith, whom the man hated with all his heart. It turned out that she had been smuggling the assets of the Kalai estate to the Duchy of Varma. Subsequently, the girl was sentenced to death. Ivai screamed to the end that the accusations were unfair, but absolutely no one believed her. Even her husband, Duke Kalai, who had once loved her with all his sincerity, did not believe her. Later, he remarried Countess Stella Bell, who had cared for him with an open heart. Kit didn't understand why she had moved into the body of Ivai. She didn't understand why she had to be that terrible villainess and was even destined for death. The indignation in her gradually subsided as she realized that once in Ivai's body, her intense emotions would not help. It was time to live differently from how Ivai had lived. Ket, who had taken over Ivai's body, invited the servants to her. A graceful maid approached, and Ket, appearing before her in the form of Ivai, asked about the length of her marriage to the Duke. The frightened maid replied that she had been married to the Duke for 5 years, wondering why she had to talk about it. Deciding to live one more year in peace, Ket intended to receive a house in the countryside as compensation. She dreamed of an independent life after divorcing Duke Kalai. She just needed to become the Duke's ex-wife. After much thought in Ivai's body, Ket came to the conclusion that to survive, she needed to start doing good deeds to change others' opinions of herself. And the first person whose opinion should change was definitely the Duke. While thinking, Ket met a gentleman in the room. The servants immediately greeted him, and at that moment, Ket realized why he was called Master, because he was Ivai's husband. When Fervent entered the room, he immediately asked how Ivai was feeling. Ket realized at the moment she opened her eyes, Duke Kalai was sleeping in front of her, as if in the shadows of the past. Looking at Fervent, Ket noticed his behavior was very different from his nighttime appearance, as if they were two different people. The gentleman's words that Ivai was fine sounded like ordinary relief, but his intention to leave was alarming. Suddenly, Ivai ran to him, clutching his lapel as if it were her last hope, and looked into his eyes with gratitude. A tense silence filled the room as everyone stared at Ivai in shock, wondering what the consequences of her fainting could be. In the novel, the main reason for blaming Ivai for the death was her strained relationship with her husband, which made her the prime suspect in the poisoning case. At this point, Ket realized that every step she took was aimed at restoring her reputation and improving her relationship with the Duke. Fervent did not respond to Ket's words, just silently walked away. The gentleman entered the library, confused about what was happening with his wife, wondering if his last conversation with her had led to this outcome. Before the library door was Mrs. Tilly. He asked her if Ivai's behavior was the result of memory loss, but Mrs. Tilly just said that he should trust the doctor and simply observe the changes. The maid noticed that the lady's behavior had become much gentler, as if she had become a different person after her illness. The Duke was confused by these changes. Before she was silent, but now she even thanked him. The maid asked an important question. Could it be that the lady had made a firm decision to change? But Fervent flatly dismissed these hopes, calling them nonsense. After the conversation, the master dismissed his servant, leaving him alone with his own thoughts. Ivai, taciturn and cold, rarely interacted with the residents of the Calais estate, except to give orders. She barely communicated with her husband. But Mrs. Tilly, the only servant who was always by her side, Mrs. Tilly decided to ask the lady how her lunch was today. The reply, as usual, was excellent. But the interesting thing was that during their first meeting, Mrs. Tilly had been so scared she was trembling. However, now, the lady felt that her servants were beginning to understand her, but she needed to improve her relationship with Fervent. During a conversation with Mrs. Tilly, she was called to the kitchen. Ivai decided to find out why she was particularly busy today. Mrs. Tilly said that the gentleman decided to have dinner at home today. A few hours later, Ivai's maid, Marion, entered her room and announced that dinner was ready. Ket, in the lady's body, noticed the tension on Marion's face. She wondered why Mrs. Tilly's niece was still scared. Deciding to ease the situation, Ket turned to Marion with a grateful voice. Ivai instructed Marion to convey that she would have dinner with her husband tonight. However, Marion replied that this had never happened before, but Ivai insisted that it was important to make a good impression. After asking the servants for help with her dress, Ivai asked Marion if she was afraid of her, and the answer was unexpected. The lady had simply abandoned her usual black color. Ivai's mysterious behavior made Marion wary, and she couldn't help but ask if there was something the lady didn't like about her work. Ivai assured her that everything was fine and asked the maid to start doing her makeup. For 4 years, the lady rarely communicated with other maids, except for Mrs. Tilly. All they saw was the stern face of the evil Ivai. But now she had to gradually convince them of her change. When Ket opened her eyes, she was shocked by the image she saw. It was unbelievable that the real Ivai actually wore such makeup every day. The lady's reaction horrified the servants, who begged for forgiveness. Deciding to wash off the unsuccessful makeup, Ket decided to appear at dinner without any extra makeup. Then, the maid brought her a tray of flowers so that Ivai could decorate her hair. The new Ivai chose Lily of the Valley and decorated her hair with it. Fervent was already at the table, waiting for his dinner, but it hadn't arrived yet. Turning to Alfred, he learned that the lady had decided to dine with him and asked him to wait a little longer. Fervent thought the idea was absurd. A wife who constantly ignored him, suddenly offering to have dinner together. It seemed strange to him at this moment. Ivai entered the dining room and announced that she simply wanted to have dinner with him. After sitting at the table, Ivai answered a question about her health, asserting that she had almost fully recovered. Her husband was surprised. She had never shown such initiative before. He asked why she wasn't wearing makeup, as since the wedding, this was the first time he had seen her without it. Ivai explained that the makeup was too heavy on her face and was ruining her skin, asking Fervent if she looked strange, but he didn't recognize her as his wife. She had never been like this. His conviction was strong that she was doing all this to torment him. The gentleman admitted that she looked strange and that she looked better without makeup, then suggested they start dinner. Not understanding the situation, the gentleman asked his wife directly what she was planning. Ivai assured him that she was not planning anything bad, but was just trying to improve her relationship with him. The gentleman reminded her of their 4 years of living together and asked what she thought of him seeing through her tricks. The Duchess became angry and replied that she was just trying to fulfill her marital duties. The Duke asked if Ivai was ready to fulfill another of her promises, but she didn't understand what he was talking about. The gentleman asked if she was ready to fulfill her duty of conceiving child. If you recall the plot of the novel, it can be seen that although everyone admired the appearance of the Emperor's younger brother, Duke Sablem, it was Duke Kalai who ultimately conquered everyone with his unparalleled beauty. Even after marriage, he was still considered the ideal man. His attention continued to be sought by many women in society. They hoped for a divorce after 5 years, but the real way for the Duke's wife to maintain her honor and dignity was to have a child. Ivai didn't want to do this. She couldn't sleep with someone she didn't love. She just wanted to live peacefully until the contract ended and then get a divorce. But now she had to have a child. This was a challenge from the Duke. He did not expect any other answer from a woman who on her wedding night had refused to mix blood with the invaders. After these words, he left, ordering Ivai to forget what was said. The Duke left Ivai alone at the table. Fervent told Ivai to act normally and stop doing things she had never done before. She couldn't understand why he suddenly became so angry, so she ended up having dinner alone, fearing that the relationship between her and Fervent had been permanently ruined. While Ivai was eating, Mrs. Tilly approached her, asking her not to worry too much. The lady sadly admitted that she had realized her rudeness towards her husband, but asked him to give her another chance. Mrs. Tilly reassured the Duchess, asserting that the gentleman had noticed her changes, but he had too much on his mind at the moment to deal with. She also noticed that her husband was too exhausted to admit that she had changed. Ivai and Mrs. Tilly moved to the summer garden to talk about the past over a cup of tea. The lady expressed her gratitude to Mrs. Tilly for her support during her temporary memory loss and for many life lessons. Then, she asked about the cultural festival at the residence of Marchioness Celestine, wanting to know when it would take place. Ivai mentioned that she had heard about the planned festival, which Mrs. Tilly confirmed. The cultural festival, as described, was an aristocratic festival, but in reality, it was a circus where people competed to see who could spend the most money. Stages decorated by noble ladies were valued much more highly than those that cost a fortune. Ivai asked Mrs. Tilly if she could participate in the festival to change people's opinion of her through singing. Then, she asked to find the best orchestra to accompany her performance. Mrs. Tilly suggested assembling a choir to accompany the lady, but she insisted that she could manage on her own, showing her talent in front of everyone on the estate. Mrs. Tilly was surprised and asked why the lady had hidden her talent until now. 3 days later, the servant reported that Marchioness Celestine had learned about her lady preparing for the festival and was very surprised. Everyone wanted to know how the lady had changed, as she had captured the attention of high society. Thanks to Mrs. Tilly, rumors of the lady's changes had spread and her reputation began to improve. Ivai waited for Fervent's reaction to all these changes, unable to sleep to see his reaction. Mrs. Tilly wished her a good night. She told Ivai that there was no point in waiting for her husband to come and to worry about her health. The lady asked what the maid thought of her husband's opinion of Ivai. Mrs. Tilly replied that every night, when Ivai waited at the door for Fervent, he would carry her to the bedroom. She didn't believe this and asked Mrs. Tilly again if it was possible someone else was carrying her to the bedroom, but the maid denied this. After Mrs. Tilly's story, Ivai came to the conclusion that Fervent didn't hate her, but she didn't understand why he was so nice to her only behind her back. That same evening, Fervent was working at the emperor's residence, and the emperor noticed that the name of Lady Kalai was often mentioned in social circles. Fervent replied rudely, saying that he knew what was happening because everyone was talking about it, even the emperor himself. The emperor also noted that something had changed in the duchess, as she waited for her husband at the door every night. The duke didn't understand why he had to leave his work to put his wife to bed and then return to the palace. He thought maybe she didn't want others to see her pout while sleeping, or maybe she didn't want anyone to see how cute she was when she slept. Then he realized that even he himself didn't understand what was happening, and he wondered if this was Ivai's new way of bullying or if she had really changed. The emperor reminded Fervent of the day he first met his wife, as he looked the same way now. Then, His Majesty informed the Duke that he had decided to attend the cultural festival and would appear there with the Empress. The Duke warned the Emperor that Ivai might be rude because of her past, and also because she had never been a part of society after her marriage. The Emperor was curious how Ivai would cope with the festival, considering she had organized a performance by the best pianists and was even performing herself. He was also surprised that the Duke was only just learning about this now, even though they lived under the same roof. The Duke said that anything could be expected from Ivai now and that it was making him nervous. The Emperor suggested to Fervent that Ivai's actions might be a sign of reconciliation and a promise of her better behavior. As he was leaving, the Emperor asked Fervent not to disappoint him. Perhaps they would have a child with the blood of the Varma and Kalai families. The next day, the servants came to the Duchess to report that preparations for the main banquet hall were complete and the piano had been covered to prevent dust. Ivai expressed her gratitude to them. The servants noticed that the lady's personality had completely changed. There were only 3 days left until the start of the event, and some noble families were ready to participate because of Ivai. It was a chance for her to prove that she was not the villain of the rumors, but a devoted wife. Mrs. Tilly appeared in the ladies' room and brought a custom-made dress. Ivai wanted to try it on immediately so she could make any necessary changes. As she, in Ivai's body, took off her dress, she went to the mirror and noticed that she had a rather beautiful figure. As she admired her new body in the mirror, the Duke entered the room. The Duke asked his wife for a moment of her time. Ivai felt embarrassed to meet the Duke in her sleepwear. The Duke saw nothing inappropriate in this, but Ivai insisted on maintaining decorum. They began to talk about the events that had not been held at the estate for a long time, after which the Duke asked another question. He wanted to know why Ivai had suddenly started acting differently and whether she was ready to change her attitude towards him. Ivai dismissed his words. The Duke slapped his forehead in exasperation, reproaching Ivai for organizing the festival, to which she replied that she was doing her duty. She reminded him that he himself had encouraged her to participate in organizing events. Ivai expressed her dissatisfaction and even hinted at possible consequences. As she tried to move away, she tripped and fell, feeling extremely embarrassed in front of her husband. When she looked, it turned out she had fallen along with the Duke. She asked her husband if he had strange tastes, since she wasn't wearing much makeup. Now, this became too much for her, and she screamed because a 2-meter-tall man was lying on top of her. The Duke explained his actions by saying that otherwise she would have avoided him as before. Ivai retorted that she was not avoiding him, but was trying to fix things. After Evai's words, the Duke pressed closer to her. Evai tried to stop him. Then she asked what prompted him to do such things. The Duke said that she was using her duty as an excuse to get what she wanted. The Duke's expression worried Evai. Evai suggested they go upstairs so they could talk more properly in a more suitable space. Fervent said he wouldn't let her go until he heard the whole truth. But Evai repeated that she wanted to improve her relationship with her husband, but didn't understand why he couldn't accept it. Then she tried to push him away, but instead she accidentally unbuttoned his shirt. Fervent pressed closer to Evai and asked her to say it again, then advised her to stop playing cat and mouse if there was any. Evai refuted the Duke's thoughts, saying that she regretted her actions. The Duke didn't understand what she gained from this, but she said that she was fulfilling the duties of a duchess to successfully complete the marriage contract. The Duke laughed, noting that she spoke of everything too easily and accused her of deception. Evai realized that her husband had misunderstood her. The Duke began to realize that there might be something else and expressed his suspicions. He began to suspect something else. So he rudely told her that for the entire time they were married, she had treated him like a piece of pathetic trash, and now she wanted to deceive him and easily bear him a child. Evai cried in front of her husband, realizing that even in this situation, her efforts were being questioned. She couldn't understand why she had never become a singer and had to be reborn into the body of the villainous duchess. All her efforts were met with a wall of the Duke's distrust. The Duke was shocked to see emotion in Evai, which she had never shown before in their 4 years of marriage. But Evai rudely replied that she was crying simply because the tears came out on their own. The Duke simply handed her a tissue and asked her to wipe her tears, trying to calm her down. He said that tears would not change anything. In response, the Duke simply took her hand without verbalizing an answer. Evai didn't understand what was happening, so she also responded rudely. The gentleman couldn't bear to see his wife cry, so he calmly wiped the tears from her face with his hand. Then he stood up and said that if there was a misunderstanding between them, she should clarify it for him. He also asked for the reason why she had done nothing but annoy him for 4 years and now decided to change. But the lady replied that she deeply regretted making him suffer and not being able to perform even the minimum duties of a duchess. She also said again that she wanted to make up for it by playing the role of a duchess and diligently performing her duties for the remaining year of their 5-year marriage, which was officially recognized by the emperor. Then, the Duke asked again about the child, but the Duchess said that she had not even thought about a child and would not allow such thoughts in the future, so he need not worry. But in reality, her opinion about the Duke's child angered him. The Duchess did not notice this, so she said that she knew he had married her on the Emperor's orders, but there was only 1 year left, so during this time, she would behave like a real Duchess, and then they would divorce. So it would be better for him to have a child with the woman he truly loves. After the Duchess's explanation, Fervent left, saying that he accepted her choice. She realized that her husband still did not fully trust her. She thought about what sin she had committed to be reborn into the body of Evai Lilith. The Duke did not understand how his emotionless wife could cry in front of him. Clear purple tears rolled down her cheeks, and it was the first time he had seen her so flustered, which made him more sensitive to her. Mrs. Tilly approached the Duke and asked if he had given the dress to his wife. She also noted that the Duke not only gave the dress, but also had a conversation with his wife. She spoke of a conversation on an everyday topic, for example, how beautiful the dress was. Then, Mrs. Tilly asked if the Duke really didn't notice Evai's efforts. The Duke did not answer this question. He asked what a woman's crying meant. She said that women usually cry when they are sad. Then, she realized that he was asking such questions because the lady had cried in front of him. But the Duke said that she didn't need to know about that. He asked her to quickly return to Evai so she could put on the dress. When Mrs. Tilly left, Fervent went to the door to hear if Evai had stopped crying. He made sure that everything was fine and was glad, saying that luckily she had stopped crying. But then he realized that he was starting to worry about this woman. The Duke realized this was absurd, as he remembered how she had treated him throughout their 4 years of marriage. Between the Thracia Empire and the Duchy of Varma, after a long battle, the Empire's army reached the capital of the Duchy of Varma. It was where Fervent first met his future wife, Evai. He had never loved anyone in his life as much as he loved this woman. This was also the first time he had entered a battle for someone's heart. It seemed that their marriage was a decision by the emperor to resolve diplomatic issues. But it was all the result of fervent learning of the intentions of the emperor's younger brother, Duke Sivilum, to marry Evai. Even when she came to the Thracia Empire, as the princess of a defeated country, she did not say a word, but fervent believed that if he showed enough determination, Evai would get used to the life of a duchess. Moreover, he was sure that she would be happy with him, and although he did everything for her, it was all an illusion. The venomous words she threw at him on their first night made him grit his teeth. Moreover, the phrase, "I would rather die than sleep with you," had turned his heart to ice. And even after years of hard work, her hatred did not disappear. The day of the event that everyone had to attend had arrived, and the Duchess decided to show her singing ability to the servants. Everyone was looking forward to Evai's rehearsal. The maid Marian said that she had heard that the most talented people are often very insecure, but the lady was so talented that she would surprise everyone around her. She thanked everyone, but she remembered that before entering the body of Evai, she was an aspiring singer with a musical education. But then suddenly Mrs. Tilly entered the room. She said that His Majesty had arrived, and with him were the Empress and Duke Sibel, whom they had not expected to see at all. Evai knew that she could not make a mistake now, especially at this crucial moment, as the high-profile reason was so that she could be made a scapegoat. If she did something wrong now, they would think her goal was to humiliate Fervent. Besides, this was Evai's public debut, so Kate had to prove to everyone with her behavior that she was a good wife, that she was definitely worthy of her husband. After all the thoughts and considerations for the upcoming debut, Evai decided to go out to greet the guests. As Evai was about to leave, Mrs. Tilly said to wait a moment, as the gentleman wanted to see her. The Duchess was frightened. Why would he want to see her, since he hated her? As she left, she said that from this day on, he would change his mind about her. As she left the room, she noticed the silhouette of a man behind the door. The gentleman standing behind the door had heard everything that was said, and then he said that the lady was thinking too shallowly. After the servants left, this frightened Evai, as she was afraid to be alone with her husband. Fervent closed the door behind them and remained alone in the room with his wife. But a frightened Evai said that it was time for them to go. Fervent wanted to touch the Duchess, but she pushed his hand away. The Duke immediately said that this was her true desire, that she wanted to hit him. The lady reacted to this by the Duke looking at her with a frightening gaze, and she became scared. But the Duke said that he was just trying to brush the hair from her face. As he left, Fervent joked that he was just relieving a little tension, although a woman like her wouldn't understand this. The lady was surprised by this, as she didn't understand how this man, with a cold heart, could laugh. Then she said that if he tried to calm her down like that, then she believed he would get used to her new look. The Duke was embarrassed by this, and said that if she behaved improperly at the debut, they would laugh at him. They needed to go to the guests now, as everyone was waiting for Evai. Then, they went to the ceremony together. As she was walking down, she asked her husband to go slower, as her dress that day was too uncomfortable. While descending the grand staircase, Evai stepped on the hem of her dress and began to fall down the stairs. Fervent, frightened, immediately held out his hand to her as a sign of his help and concern. The attempt to catch the Duchess was unsuccessful. He couldn't catch her in time. Evai fell and hit her head on the steps, causing her to faint. The event at the residence was about to begin, and such a ridiculous situation had happened to Evai. All the guests had gathered in the ballroom. The surrounding guests were discussing how the residence they were in had not changed since the time of the previous Duke Kalai. One of the servants of the Duke Kalai's residence approached the men who were looking around and shared the news that the Duchess would be singing today. Then, one of the men noticed that the waiters were helping Duchess Kalai prepare everything, as the Duchess was scheduled to sing that day. Duke Sablem also attended the event, because if it were a normal evening, he certainly would not have appeared. But the fact that Evai would be singing changed everything. At that moment, the Duchess was sitting on the bed in her room and was being examined by a doctor. The doctor told the Duke that the injury was not serious, but it would definitely be difficult for her to stand on stage because her ankle was injured. Fervent began to blame himself for everything, because if he hadn't walked so fast, none of this would have happened. Evai didn't care about the injury, so she immediately went to the festival. She was ashamed to keep the guests waiting for so long, as many important people had arrived. But as she walked, she realized that it would be very difficult for her to move because of the injury. Just in time, Her husband supported her so that she wouldn't fall. The Duke insisted that she should listen to the doctor's advice. It was just a song, and no one would care if she didn't sing it. She could not come, because the song she was about to sing was only for Fervent. The Duke couldn't believe his ears, so he asked again. Evi confirmed her intentions to her husband and advised him to listen to the song carefully. Then, the Duke took his wife's hand and led her into the hall to the guests. The news that Evi's song was dedicated to the Duke made him feel embarrassed. He also asked that this side not be shown to anyone else, because the real Evi was his. At this time, Duke Sablem was asking the servants when the Duchess would come down. In half an hour at the festival, Sablem had drunk his 7th glass of champagne. The Emperor reprimanded Duke Sablem, as the evening had not even begun and he was already drinking, and he also asked him to behave properly. Even the Emperor himself noticed the change in Duke Sablem's emotions regarding the cultural festival. At that moment, the Duchess and the Duke descended the stairs. Everyone was shocked by the changes in Evi, because at the wedding, it was clear to everyone that they were as cold to each other as enemies after a battle. No one understood why Fervent was looking at his wife like that. He looked at her with loving eyes. The atmosphere was like a blooming garden. There were very pleasant smells around, but some plants were actually thorns. The Duchess greeted the guests very kindly. The Emperor said that he had begun to worry because Evi had not appeared at the royal palace or in their circle for a long time. And he also heard that she had recently fainted, and he asked how she was feeling. Evi also responded to the Emperor quite politely and thanked him for his concern. Sablem rudely interrupted their conversation. Then he added that it would have been better if Evi had become his wife instead of Fervent's. Kate realized that she was not really familiar with Sablem, as she had not met him in the book, and she thought it was better not to get close to him. Then she apologized for not being able to fully fulfill her duties for 4 years. From now on, she would do everything in her power to be a good Duchess. She also promised to perform a song as proof and asked everyone to wait for her. She dedicated her song to Fervent and took a deep breath with complete delight, preparing to perform a musical masterpiece. When she started singing, all the guests were shocked, as they did not expect Evi to be so talented. For a moment, Evi thought that the crowd seemed to be enjoying the performance, and her leg didn't hurt at all. But in the middle of the performance, she felt a terrible pain in her leg. To the surprise of the entire audience in the hall, Evi fell right on the stage. But she did not stop and continued her magnificent performance. At that moment, Fervent ran to her and wanted to pick her up, but Evi stopped him and continued to sing. Right on the floor, Evi could only think of one thing, that she could not stand on her own 2 feet. However, she found the strength to continue performing, as if nothing had happened. The guests noted that the girl's posture resembled a scene from an opera, as the girl was singing almost on her knees. But the Duke did not listen to anyone, because he was captivated by his wife's voice. Everyone present secretly whispered that they had never heard anything more enchanting in their lives. When the Duchess finished her song, Sablem decided that a beautiful bright red rose would surely give this song a wonderful aroma. As Sablem moved to get closer to the Duchess, Fervent noticed and moved past the man in front of him, approaching her. The Duke first of all kissed her hand, adding words of thanks for the beautiful song that she had heroically performed for him. Sablem was not happy with the Duke's actions, but the Duke told his wife that from now on, she should not sing songs about him in public, as he wanted to hear them in private. He wanted her to be only his Duchess. He wanted her and her inner world to belong only to him. In the famous novel Fervent and Stella, the main villain of Lilith appears briefly at the beginning, prompting them to date. Her role was simple and small, sacrifice for the love of others. In the original, the couple was only bound by a marriage contract, nothing more. And nowhere was it written that Fervent liked Evi, not even a little, so why was he talking like that? Kate didn't understand why the Duke wanted her to sing this song for him in private, and why he wanted this bright side to be his alone. After all, in the original, he only behaved this way with the main character and not with Evi. He felt nothing for her. So, the Duchess said that she would sing for her husband 1,000 more times. Then, the Marchioness called her and praised her, singing. The Duchess was very pleased with the Marchioness's compliment. When Evi wanted to approach the Marchioness, the Duke took her hand, saying that he was afraid to let her go alone. She didn't understand what was happening, but the Duke said that they had to present themselves to the public as a real couple. Because of this, Evai thanked the Marchioness, saying that she greatly appreciated her attending this cultural festival and apologized for not being able to spend more time with them. When Fervent saw that his wife's hair was a little messy, he decided to fix it. Evai began to worry, as she thought it was too late for them to present a harmonious couple. The people standing around the couple, watching Fervent carefully fix his wife's hair, were deeply moved. The evening passed unnoticed, and all the guests began to gather, saying goodbye to the Duchess and expressing their sincere gratitude for the evening and her wonderful performance. The guests left in complete delight. Even the Empress herself shared the impression that she was moved to tears by Evai's singing. And the Emperor called Evai a real criminal, because all this time she had not appeared in public with such elegant vocal abilities. The Emperor and Empress immediately invited Evai and her husband to their ball, which Evai was very surprised about, because this was a chance for her to carry out her plan, to appear as the best wife in public. But the Duke began to worry aloud about the invitation, as Evai had been absent from the public for a long time, and she didn't know anyone in this circle. She would probably feel extremely awkward, so if she didn't want to, he wouldn't force her. Sablum immediately appeared, offering to take care of Lady Evai. The Emperor expressed his dissatisfaction with Sablum's behavior and manners, as he was not even anything to her, yet he offered completely strange support to another man's wife. Ignoring the Emperor, Sablum began to pester Evai with his questions. Sablum was so persistent that he even tried to touch the Duchess's face. Without waiting for the strange man to touch his wife, Fervent immediately pushed his hand away. Sablum was angry, but Fervent said that he was just swatting away an annoying mosquito and apologized, noting that Sablum should apologize to Evai. Fervent informed the Emperor that he would be with his wife, accepting the invitation. The Emperor was very pleased and would look forward to seeing the couple at his reception. The remaining guests left, and the Duke and Duchess, after seeing them off, were left alone. Fervent thanked his wife and noted that she was a good girl, but it was time for him to go. He was about to leave, but then Evai carefully took his hand. She was burning with curiosity, so the first thing she did was ask if the Duke liked her song. But before she could hear his answer, Evai asked him what he thought of her. She said she wanted to know the truth from him. At that moment, Fervent realized that he was thinking about how lovely and beautiful Evai was, and that his heart, which had been bound for so long, was now free, and now he just wanted to hug her. But instead of beautiful words, he said that she had yelled at him enough for the past 4 years, and her voice was truly amazing, so much so that the piano couldn't be heard. After what was said, Fervent felt extremely ashamed of his words that he had said aloud, and he couldn't believe what he had said, as his thoughts were completely about something else, about something beautiful. Upon hearing the Duke's words, Evai became sad and said that she knew she had behaved hatefully towards him for the past 4 years. Fervent decided to ask the Duchess if what she had said earlier about wanting to be forgiven was true. Evai confidently said yes. Sighing heavily, as if clutching his aching head, the Duke said that people cannot change so quickly, but honestly admitted that he was waiting for the Duchess to change. The Duke was moved by his emotions and confessed his love to the Duchess, because for 4 years he had been patient and waited for the moment to tell her about it. But all this time, she had never been honest and sincere with him. But he couldn't shake the feeling that even in this warm moment, she was still pretending. With eyes full of absolute sadness, she responded with understanding, as Ket knew that Evai could not change instantly. As Evai was about to leave, she said that she was very grateful to the Duke for this. Evening. Fervent didn't understand why Evai was so nice to him in public, but in private, it was as if she was cutting his heart to pieces. He couldn't let her go, so he ran to hug her tightly. Then he leaned into her ear and whispered to her about his desire that the Duchess would not leave him. Ket had no idea what was going on in this man's mind, as he was so cold to her, and now he was hugging her. Evai asked him to let go, as he was holding her too tightly. She told the Duke that she would not run away from him. A split second later, Fervent said that he really liked her singing. The Duchess reminded him that he had said it was just a performance. Fervent felt remorse for what he had said, noting that he had simply expressed himself incorrectly. After all, he had seen how diligently she had prepared for this performance, so he couldn't call it anything else. Levi said that it would be nice if it wasn't just in words but also in deeds, because in public he was very kind to her, but in private he was too rude. To prove his good attitude towards his wife, Fervent kissed her. After this eventful and very unusual evening, the Duchess went to her room, lay down on her bed, and began to replay everything that had happened. In her head, she didn't understand if her actions were of any benefit, and she also didn't understand what her husband's sincerity was. After all, if she never found out what Fervent was thinking, she would be killed. At this moment, Mrs. Tilly entered the room to help the lady change. The Duchess showed her sincerity and thanked Mrs. Tilly for her help. Mrs. Tilly decided to ask what her husband had said about her wonderful performance. She was sure that he had praised her. Levi recounted the evening again and shared what her husband had said about her not being a performance. Mrs. Tilly tried to reassure the Duchess by saying that he certainly didn't mean it. She also said that the Duke was an extremely honest man, so sometimes his words might sound rude, but this was not true. She suggested that she take a walk in the garden, as the evening air helps to relax and sort out thoughts. At this time, the Duke was sitting in his office and thinking that he was going crazy, because he realized that he had shown impulsiveness by kissing Levi, with sad thoughts that it would have been better for him to remain silent at that moment, as his opinion of Levi's singing clearly sounded too harsh. Feeling that anxious thoughts about Levi completely possessed him, he began to feel short of breath, and he decided to go to the window. Unexpectedly, through the window, he noticed Levi sitting in the garden gazebo. After she looked around and made sure that there was no one in the area, she took off her shoes and lay down in a comfortable way for her. Since the Duke was standing near the window and looking at his wife, he had the feeling that he was peeping, even though they were married. Levi clearly felt that someone was looking at her, and turning around, she noticed someone at the window. She was distracted by Mrs. Tilly, who said that she had brought macarons and hot chocolate. At this moment, the Duke took the opportunity to quickly hide from her sight. Ashamed of himself, the last day had ended. And that was the morning when Levi opened her eyes and realized that she was in a mansion. Mrs. Tilly woke her up and reminded her that from that day on, she had to greet the gentleman when he left for the palace. Mrs. Tilly had suggested this idea to her yesterday over tea, but she seemed to have completely forgotten. That night she said that the gentleman was much simpler than Levi thought and advised her to continue doing what she was doing now. But Levi realized that 4 years had passed since their wedding, and soon he would drink poison wine and she would be blamed for it. She also realized that she would see Stella and Fervent together before she died. To avoid this, she needed to establish a relationship with him as soon as possible. So, she excitedly asked Mrs. Tilly how to get close to him as quickly as possible. She didn't think the Duchess was so interested in a relationship with her husband, but with a sly smile on her face, Mrs. Tilly said that she knew a way to convince the Duke of the Duchess's sincerity. In the morning, Mrs. Tilly helped the Duchess get dressed. Mrs. Tilly said that she could go to the Duke's room right now and help him choose cufflinks. She said that would be a very precious and sincere gesture from the Duchess towards her husband. Levi still didn't understand how this could affect their relationship. Mrs. Tilly explained that choosing cufflinks for him was a gesture of empathy and appreciation, as the past 4 years had probably been very difficult, and she needed to fix the relationship so that their marriage would flourish again. Mrs. Tilly suggested to Levi that a more effective way to strengthen their marriage was to produce an heir. But Levi did not expect this at all. Mrs. Tully continued that they were about to celebrate their 5-year wedding anniversary, and according to tradition in Sir Fovent's family, there must be an heir by that time. In complete desperation, Levi realized that even if she couldn't establish a relationship with him, she would have to bear a child so as not to die. The Duchess went to Fovent's room, where Anfet met her. He was shocked to see Levi outside her husband's room in the morning. Levi told Anfet that she had come to the room to help her husband choose his clothes. Anfet said in surprise that Levi had never done such a thing, so he had to inform his lord that she had arrived. But Mrs. Tully was furious with him, saying he didn't dare speak to the lady that way, and told him to open the door immediately. When the lady entered the room, Anfet and Mrs. Tully wished her luck. They understood that the lady did not yet know the meaning of helping to choose cufflinks. When she entered, she was surprised to see the interior of his room was much more modest than she had thought. He had given her the master bedroom to avoid trouble, but she didn't think he would sleep there. so she didn't understand why Ovi was so cruel to him, as he was very kind to do that. Ovi accidentally stepped on a pile of papers and quickly began to gather them. Just as she was gathering the papers, Fervent entered the room. He was surprised as this was the first time she had entered his room, but when Ovi turned around, he was shirtless as he had just come out of the bathroom. Ovi was shocked and thought she was hallucinating. When she realized it wasn't a hallucination, she screamed in shock. But Fervent was only worried that Ovi had scattered his papers. Leaning as close to her face as possible, he told her that she had violated his private space. But the lady denied everything and said she only came to help him choose cufflinks. Fervent was shocked, so he asked her if she knew what it meant. Then he realized that Mrs. Tilly hadn't said anything to her. Ovi didn't understand what this meant, so she asked her husband to explain it to her. Fervent said that usually the husband has more energy in the morning, so he tries harder in the morning, and the wife then chooses cufflinks for him. So this is an excuse to enter the husband's bedroom in the morning. Ovi decided that he was trying to tease her. So she decided to follow this tradition. She placed her hand gently on his bare chest, but she didn't understand what she was doing. Only then did she realize that if she let go of his hand, she would lose everything. Fervent was scared, so he said that if she was joking, she had better let go. The Duchess continued to play along, so she told him not to worry because they were husband and wife. She didn't understand that the Duke didn't understand her joke, so he immediately threw her onto the bed. She opened her eyes and saw him beside her. She was scared, so she screamed, and the Duke asked in a calm voice why she was so scared, because she was the one who wanted to touch him. At that moment, Fervent placed the Duchess's hand on his chest. Then Ovi screamed that she was just kidding, and Fervent said that this was no longer a joke, but a blatant provocation. And the Duke would certainly have enough courage to provoke it. The Duke was ready for whatever his wife suggested, but she screamed again and said that the only thing she wanted from him was for him to dry the water after his bath. Here, they both felt the awkwardness that was happening between them. He obeyed the Duchess and did what she asked. At this time, Alfred was very worried because it was already 7:30 in the morning and they still hadn't come out, but Mrs. Tilly, on the contrary, was very calm. Alfred said that he couldn't wait any longer, so he decided to enter their room. Mrs. Tilly reacted quickly and grabbed his lapel to stop him. Alfred said that he was taking twice as long as usual to get ready, and he needed to make sure everything was okay. Mrs. Tilly said that Alfred was very naive because now the master and the lady were spending time alone. But Alfred didn't understand this, so he started asking Mrs. Tilly tactless questions. When the Duke had finished his wife's request, she said that she would go to her room because she was exhausted from everything that had happened this morning. But the gentleman stopped the Duchess with his hand and asked for help choosing clothes for the day. She asked him if this matter was related to any family traditions, because if it was, she would not follow it. The Duke replied that there were no traditions on this subject, so Ovi agreed. She decided to choose the first set she saw, which turned out to be a white suit. But when she turned around, she saw there was a towel on the floor, which scared her. However, she saw that her husband was not naked at all, but was already standing there in trousers. Fervent thought that Ovi expected something more. He thought that this was what she wanted from him. Ovi denied his words and asked him to get dressed quickly. While the gentleman was getting dressed, he asked Ovi to find him some cufflinks, and suddenly she noticed some rather cute cufflinks. They were heart-shaped, and she immediately gave them to him. The gentleman asked her if there was a reason she chose them. The Duchess said that the only reason for this choice was so they could become closer to each other, and that she wanted them to stop fighting and start their family life anew. Although it was strange for the Duke to hear this from her, he was still happy about it. He said that he noticed she had been trying very hard lately and promised that he would also try to reciprocate. Hearing this, Ovi beamed with happiness. It seemed that everything was going well for her. Mrs. Tilly, who was standing behind the door, had heard the entire conversation between Ovi and the Duke. She was overjoyed to see their relationship improving. At that moment, the Duke and Duchess unexpectedly came out of the room. Alfred and Mrs. Tilly immediately invited the couple to breakfast. All the servants gathered, one by one wishing a good morning to Sir Fervent. In the breakfast room before the meal, the Duke informed Ovi that they would have dinner together that night, so she should wait for him and prepare a late dinner. The servants were delighted with this news, because Ovi and Fervent would be having dinner together for the first time since their wedding. The Duchess happily replied, realizing that they seemed to be a perfect couple to everyone. But then she asked again about the late dinner, because that meant they would be together in the evening. Reaching out to lift her face, the Duke told the lady that of all the Duchess's duties, this was the most important. Face to face, Fervent decided to ask why she was so worried since he was talking about consummation. Fervent then quickly left while Ovi was still in shock. He left, so she wouldn't have time to answer anything. The Duchess tried to call Fervent to understand what he meant. Having finished mounting his horse, Fervent shouted back to the Duchess that they would discuss the matter in the evening. After their wedding night, Fervent and Ovi had never slept in the same bed. But in the original, their first night did not go as planned. When the Duchess threw a tantrum, and it left scars in their hearts. She knew that with such a description of the wedding night, Fervent would probably be against consummation. But he suddenly changed his mind. The servants, after seeing and hearing everything that was happening, began to whisper that something was clearly not right. Consummation seemed impossible for them after so many years. Ovi still stood there in shock, but Mrs. Tilly beside her was moved with happiness and said that she knew that the lady would surely succeed. Everywhere, one could hear the servants' shouts about the urgent need to prepare everything, both dinner and a bath with rose petals. Tears had already begun to well up in Ovi's eyes. She realized that she had made a huge mistake. Mrs. Tilly tried to reassure Ovi that this was how it should have been from the beginning. Their dialogue continued. Mrs. Tilly told the Duchess that now the elders would not scold Ovi as soon as the baby was born. There would be no pressure. At that moment, Mrs. Tilly let slip a phrase that Ovi did not like to hear. She said that it was as if they were getting married for the second time, but then she immediately apologized. This remark clearly did not please the Duchess, and becoming angry, she called Mrs. Tilly tactless. Ovi didn't care if it was a new marriage or not. Her main goal was to complete this marriage successfully and divorce. The Duchess immediately tried to smooth over the situation between them by telling Mrs. Tilly that Fervent had probably mentioned consummation out of politeness. But Mrs. Tilly insisted that the Duke would not say such words. She also whispered in Ovi's ear, reminding her that he would not even touch her without permission because he had promised. At that moment, all of Fervent's last warm touches flashed through Ovi's mind. But Ovi didn't understand why he suddenly talked about consummation and asked Mrs. Tilly about it. Mrs. Tilly said that Ovi had recently become so beautiful that the gentleman could not have reacted otherwise. Ovi was surprised by Mrs. Tilly's answer. Until that moment, she had felt everything completely differently. The scene shifts straight to the Teresa Royal Palace. Fervent was working at the Teresa Palace, but he was haunted by thoughts of the conversation with Ovi about reviving their marriage. The Duke understood her intentions, so he tried to steer the conversation in a peaceful direction. However, as soon as they began to build a good relationship, the pressure on Ovi to produce an heir only increased. He thought that even the sharp Mrs. Tilly was strangely obsessed with everything related to the heir, probably to protect Ovi from the elders. Then, the Count of the Celestine family ran up. Celestine entered the room and asked why Fervent was frowning so much. The Count noticed that when the servant outside knocked incessantly to deliver a letter, the Duke didn't even notice him entering. Celestine immediately noticed the Duke's cufflinks and was very surprised, because the Duke himself certainly would not have chosen them. Fervent told the Count that Ovi had helped him choose them, but Celestine couldn't believe it. He was shocked. The Duke was not pleased with Celestine's reaction, noting that it was normal for a wife to help choose things. Celestine immediately apologized for his tactlessness. Fervent looked at the letter he had received and said that he had to decide something urgently today, as the message from His Majesty could not be delayed. As he was leaving, Celestine joked that the Empire could not survive without the Duke and wished him luck. But the gentleman sharply asked what Celestine liked about his wife. He didn't even know how to answer, but he said that he certainly liked her beauty and grace. And then the Count added that he loved her for her beauty and kind soul. But the Duke didn't believe it, as Celestine had talked about his ideal type even before the wedding. This made the Count very angry, and he asked what the Duke liked about his wife. What was the reason for such a quick wedding, as if someone had stepped on his heels? Fervent immediately answered the Count that Eva was his first love, and he was sure that she would also be the last love of his life. He had known and felt this from the the very beginning. Celestine was stunned. He had no idea that the Duke was so deeply in love. Then he remembered that Fuvin had to appear at the royal event next week with his wife. The Duke replied to the Count that yes, and he had even promised this to the Emperor himself. The Duke was a little surprised that the Count already knew about this appearance of their couple. The Duke, with his head bowed, was writing on a piece of paper, but then Celestine said that Stella would also be there. The Duke immediately raised his head and asked in surprise what Celestine had said about Stella. Lady Stella was one of the candidates for the position of the Duke's wife. Immediately, Fuvin remembered a childhood memory. His mother died in childbirth, and his father showed no interest, so Fuvin spent a neglected childhood on a country estate. The only memory left from that time was of Mrs. Teely, the Duke's nanny, and also of Miss Stella, who lived on the neighboring estate. Fuvin decided to ask Celestine if he knew that it was impolite to mention another woman's name to a married man. And why did he clarify that she was a candidate for the position of his wife? Celestine, after the Duke's words, realized that he had behaved extremely foolishly and apologized for everything he had said to the Duke. He was just sure that he and Lady Belle had been friends since childhood. Then, Fuvin said that if Celestine had nothing more to say, then he would go, as it was time for him to see the Emperor. Celestine was sure that the Emperor was probably spending time with the Empress, but then the Duke smiled and said that he also wanted to have a good time with his wife. The moment the Duke left, the Count was stunned by Fuvin's words about wanting to have a good time with his wife, in normal or physical conversations. Celestine expected Eva to have changed, but he was confused by the question of whether Fuvin could have changed on his own. At that moment, Mrs. Teely was in Eva's room, and she said rather harshly that the Duchess needed to make eye contact with the gentleman at least once. All the maids gathered around Eva, and all they did was exclaim about how much time had passed and how wonderful the atmosphere would be. Unexpectedly for Eva, a maid approached Mrs. Teely, saying that she had brought that musk. But the Duchess exclaimed that they were creating a very suspicious picture by discussing that musk. Teely tried to calm the lady, saying that she had nothing to worry about, as musk was very valuable in their circles. The maid, who was holding that bag of musk on a tray, had a very strange expression on her face. The Duchess was very worried about this strange situation. Mrs. Teely tried to put the bag in the lady's petticoat, but she began to completely refuse to use something so suspicious. But Mrs. Teely was very persistent and quickly put the bag where she wanted it. The Duchess exclaimed that she should immediately take out what she had stuffed into her, but she said that if she took it out, the dress would be ruined. When Teely wanted to ask Marian to bring some rose oil, she saw that her assistant was not where she had called. Turning around, she and the Duchess were shocked by what they saw. Marian was under Eva's dress. She didn't understand how Marian got drunk on the scent so quickly, but Marian said that the smell of musk was so beautiful that she couldn't feel her fingertips. She began to scold her assistant, because such things could not be said in front of the lady. But Eva convinced them that everything was fine. Marian said that all the maids were constantly talking about how beautiful and lovely the Duchess was. In a dreamy state, Marian asked the lady why she so rarely attended gatherings of nobles from other families. And Eva confusedly replied that next week she would be at a ball in the royal palace. At that moment, Mrs. Teely realized that she needed to show the dresses now, or better yet a few, because she needed to decide which dress the lady would wear to the event. At that moment, Anne Fett knocked on the door and said that a message had arrived from Master. The letter given to Eva said that the Duke, by order of His Majesty, would have to work late and she would have to go to bed without waiting. All the servants were shocked because they had all tried so hard to prepare the Duchess for this night. Eva thought that Fuvin himself did not want this privacy, so she could change her clothes. The maids were extremely disappointed with the situation. They had tried so hard with the makeup, hair, and all for nothing. Eva said that her maids had done such a good job with her look that she would go to dinner like that. This made the maids very happy. She realized that with this act, she had won the hearts of the maids and got rid of her bad image. Now she could go for a walk in the garden. Mrs. Teely offered to accompany Eva, but the Duchess replied that she wanted to spend some time alone. Marian was angry with the Emperor. She said that they had waited for so many months and years, and he had ruined everything. Mrs. Teely stood up for the Duke, saying that he certainly knew nothing. But Marian stood her ground, as the gentleman was a distant relative of the royal family, and the empress only gave birth to daughters. The real heir now was Duke Sable Lamb, as he was not yet married. The maid said that if the lady gave birth to a son, then he had every chance to ascend the throne. Well, Tilly became incredibly angry, saying that the gentleman was extremely loyal to the royal family, and it was good that no other servants were around. Such things should not be said in the future. When Tilly left the room, Anfet stopped her, announcing that another letter had arrived from the gentleman. Earlier, the Duke had personally gone to see the Emperor. Fuvin came with the words that His Majesty should let him off duty early, as today the health of his family depended on it. The Duke promised that he would come to work early tomorrow and sort everything out, and the Emperor easily let him go and told him to go home as it was very urgent. The Emperor just wanted to eat with the Duke, as they had a new chef, which was the urgent matter that the Duke was not very happy about. The Emperor wanted the Duke to bring a piece of cake for his wife, but the gentleman refused, as he was in a great hurry. When the Duke left, the Emperor's wife came to His Majesty, and they discussed how the Duke had really changed a lot, as he was in such a hurry to see the Duchess. After learning that Fuvin would be back that evening, all the servants searched for the lady all over the neighborhood. It was at this moment that Fuvin returned and asked what was happening. Mrs. Tilly told him that they had received a message that the Duke would be arriving soon, and they started looking for the lady to tell her, but the lady had disappeared. They couldn't find her anywhere, which left Fuvin in complete shock. A few hours earlier at the residence, Eva was walking in the garden, thinking about how good it was that the Duke was staying. Late today, although he was officially her husband, she was not ready to share a bed with a man she barely knew. And even if he was incredibly handsome and charming, she couldn't do it either. Anyway, she probably didn't attract the Duke in this regard. He probably only suggested sleeping together tonight to show the servants they were a couple. Anyway, her goal was to fulfill her duties as a contract wife and divorce peacefully. She thought it over, and it was time to go back. But in the distance, she saw a small house in the garden. Entering this small house, she saw no one. She realized that this house was too clean for an abandoned house, and she thought that maybe it was the gardener's house. As the lady was about to leave, she noticed a cute black kitten under the table. Eva couldn't leave. She approached it and asked where its mother was. She also realized that if she left it here, it might starve to death. But if she took it, it would never see its mother. She decided to stay with it and wait for its mother, as she had plenty of time before dinner. When the sun had already begun to set, Tilly had started looking for the Duchess to tell her that a letter had arrived from Fuvin. Mrs. Tilly saw the door of the small house was ajar. She entered the house and saw the lady sleeping right on the floor. At first, she was about to wake her up, but then she realized that she couldn't miss such a good opportunity for the Duke. Mrs. Tilly told him everything and said that she had searched the entire area around the house, but could not find the lady. But she said she had checked everywhere, except his little house, where he and his wife could spend time alone. She added that the Duchess was probably ashamed that the servants knew about their wedding night, so she thought they could spend the night with her in a more relaxed atmosphere, as the other servants did not know where Avai was. Mrs. Tilly let the Duke find her himself. When the Duke entered his house, he saw his wife sleeping right on the floor. He was confused by the question of why she was sleeping on the floor and not on the bed. He looked at her and just thought about how sweet she was when she slept. She radiated tenderness and beauty. Fuvin couldn't resist and decided to pick her up. The Duchess woke up at his touch. She didn't understand how she could have fallen so soundly asleep. Avai opened her eyes completely and was startled to see Fuvin beside her. The Duke said that this was his private little house, and he spent time here when he wanted to be alone. Fuvin held out his hand to her and invited her into the house. The Duchess realized that she had been walking in the garden and had entered the small house, after which she had fallen asleep. The Duke was wearing the suit he had worn that morning, which meant he hadn't worked late and had come home immediately. The Duchess said she didn't want to go home. She knew that if they entered the house, she would have to sleep with the Duke. His face clearly showed disappointment at Avai's refusal. The gentleman said that couples with good relationships should sleep together. Avai realized this was true, and she asked her husband to promise that they would sleep in the same room, but on different beds. The Duke said that she herself had said that they should start over as a loving couple. But according to the Duchess, they were a loving couple in front of everyone, and this did not mean they would sleep together. Moreover, he did not want to have children from her. The Duke said quietly that he did not say that he did not want to have children from her. The Duchess did not hear and asked him to speak louder. But then the smell of musk began to take effect. The Duke fell to the floor. He did not understand what that smell was. Fuven had absolutely no idea what was happening, asking the Duchess what she had done to his body. Fuven immediately jumped up and hugged the Duchess tightly. Avai had completely forgotten about the little bag that Mrs. Teely had given her and did not understand what was happening. She abruptly pushed the Duke away from her. As soon as Avai pushed him away, he immediately realized what that smell was, and his eyes were filled with questions. He immediately knelt down and went straight under the Duchess's dress, taking out that bag. Avai was clearly even more angry about what the Duke was capable of. But at that moment, he said that it was the musk of a precious white deer that lives in the north. This thing in Avai's dress was very strange. The Duchess angrily exclaimed that she didn't know what it was because Teely had left it when she was changing. Fuven, who was very self-confident, thought that the Duchess was surely playing dumb and that she understood perfectly well why this was happening. But he said that girls have been using these musk bags to seduce boys for over 100 years, and she had fulfilled all the conditions for seduction. A lot of effort was clearly put into the makeup, which was complemented by a beautiful outfit and finished with a seductive scent. Approaching the Duke, Avai looked straight into his deepest eyes and said that the servants who planned all this were to blame for this image and scent. She only promised them to walk like this until the evening. Hearing these words, the Duke decided that if she dressed up just for the sake of her maid's wish, then she should fulfill his wish. Almost touching her lips, he gently said that since she had fulfilled the maid's wish, she should certainly fulfill her husband's wish. Wasn't he more important than them? At this moment, the Duchess's mind was filled with the thought that if she had known what the end of all this would be, she would have immediately pulled this cursed bag out of her dress. Although on the other hand, how could she have known that the Duke would come home early and that he had not warned her or asked the maids to find her? Without thinking twice, Fuven grabbed the lady in his arms. As was typical of the Duchess, she tried to stop him, but the gentleman was persistent and put her on the bed. Already lying on the bed, Avai again tried to show her character and asked her husband to stay away from her. She didn't want any of what he had planned. Fuven was again persistent, gently touching her and saying that he would not leave her. The Duchess angrily shouted that they would be looking for her in the mansion. But Fuven tried to explain to her that they were spending time alone and there was no need for anyone to look for her. Unable to control her negative emotions at all, Avai told her husband that his attempts to possess her were like the actions of an animal. This horrified and angered the Duke. How dare she? To prove her point, Avai explained that forcing her onto the bed really looked like the actions of an animal. This behavior only provoked him, after which he immediately tore his shirt. It seemed that such behavior aroused him. He stood there with his bare, toned torso right in front of her, and her gaze was quite cold. Leaning close to her face, the Duke began to remind her of what she had told him on their first night about her desire to take revenge on him, although he thought she had already done it. Avai was confused, not understanding what he was talking about. The Duke shared with her that he was constantly clinging to her and fighting a constant thirst, which was the strongest revenge. Looking straight into his sharp eyes, Avai couldn't believe that Fuven himself had admitted to clinging to her. After all, he had never shown any loving or affectionate feelings for her in the original novel. Avai and the Duke were not bound by love, but the Duchess said that she was not interested in revenge. She just wanted to live in peace. It was at this moment that thunder rumbled outside the window and heavy rain began to fall. Now, they certainly wouldn't be able to get out of there. The Duchess had never made it to dinner and was still hungry. The Duke himself heard her stomach rumbling. Fuven suggested that Avai have dinner together and then talk to each other. She again showed her aggression and character, insisting on continuing the conversation. But the terrible feeling of hunger still overcame the Duchess, and they began to dine on what was available in this small house. The Duke, after searching the house for more food for his wife, discovered a bottle of wine. He was clearly very happy about it. Offering the Duchess to try some strawberry wine, he filled her glass. Surprisingly, this time she did not resist and began to taste the strawberry wine that Foven had found. He couldn't stop looking at his Duchess with his sharp and at the same time gentle eyes while she was enjoying that wine. Foven noticed the crumbs left on his wife's face and began to wipe them from her sweet little face. But it was not to be. I had no time for tolerance.